Welcome everyone to the Pick Six Weekly Recap with my best bud, Rudy Tamarchio. Rudy, we got the dub. We beat Wake Forest. Where should we start?
Well, let me check in real quick. You doing okay? Because I'm looking at your backdrop and it's like, "Hello, darkness, my old friend."
Wanted to set a
But you're
different
not a
vibe.
Bama fan.
No. I'm not. I'm not an SEC fan in general, but we will get into that. Let's first talk about our Canes dominating Wake Forest in the fourth quarter. So I want to start this off really quick because I think doing weekly recaps like this and getting that full day in between doing it allows me to calm my nerves, come to my senses, think logically,
Oh,
because
yeah.
at first, at like my first knee jerk reaction was we played like crap. That was a crappy game. It was crap. It was crap. It was crap. And I sat in it, rewatched it, watched the highlights. Definitely a good game, but I will warrant why I felt that way. Because in my opinion, this was pretty much a tight game up until 8 minutes left in the fourth quarter. You know what I mean? It wasn't until we got that fumble, we got that 2 point conversion on that last touchdown that like put us up by two scores that you could really see us pulling away. But up until then, Wake Forest was playing pretty well. How did you see the game overall? And then we can get into specifics.
Yeah, for the few people that were texting me during the game, I kept thinking like this felt weird. It was a game
Yeah.
that just felt really odd. And watching, defensively outside of the first quarter, they did fantastic, but it was still one of those things that just didn't feel right from the beginning. Like there was just
Yeah.
I would never been this was the game that this was the home game that I was probably the most frustrated because I kept yelling at the refs the entire time.
Oh, you
And it
you
was
mean
just
you mean that one pass interference call? I think it was on Horton when Restrepo caught a touchdown. That
that, and they missed the block in the back on a punt return that went back for like 50, when they returned it back to the 50.
Yep.
And then there are a number of times, like I just keep watching Simeon Barrow fix his jersey between every play. And I'm sitting there going, if his jersey's being stretched in 10 different directions, he's probably being held.
A
And
little bit.
I'm,
A
and
little bit.
I'm trying to not be a homer, but like watching that game, it just felt odd seeing
Yeah.
everything. And then, I will say that the fourth quarter, yes, Miami looked great. Things started moving in Miami's favor, both offensively with the run game and defensively. But I think that's just part of wearing a team down. And if you look at the way that Wake Forest was trying to move, I think Miami's defense just figured it out. And I think what's great is that what they figured out, one, yes, those are the issues that the bye week should have fixed, but also I think it's a lot of momentum that they can carry into Syracuse this coming week.
Yeah, I thought overall everyone played great. I mean, Cam was 27 for 38, 280 yards, two touchdowns, one interception. For Cam, very mid. But for any other quarterback, I think those are pretty good numbers. Those are great numbers. The one interception he got was on that shuffle pass play that was supposed to go to Arroyo that he would have made 9 out of other 10 times. You know what I mean? Like that was something we've seen him do and then do in much dire situations than what he was in. It was kind of like a fluke thing. I actually forgot about that interception completely because
They
that was right before the half, right?
Yeah, they touched on it in the coaches press conference today. So Shannon Dawson was talking about it, and like everything else, like every series that comes out, they ask, "Well, what did you see out there? What happened with that mistake?" And
Yeah.
Cam was honest. He said, "I saw Arroyo moving, and I thought he was going to keep moving, so I underhanded the ball to him. He stopped when that happened because he saw a defender out of the corner of his eye, and that's why the pick happened. If Arroyo kept moving, he probably gets hit, which isn't helpful either. But that was kind of the miscommunication on that play."
Yeah, I think if he would have kept moving, we would have been good. I think it looked like, again, watching it in instant replay, because you get all the different angles, not in real time, but in the replay and the highlights, it looked like it was a well-designed play. It didn't look like he was kind of doing a magician. It looked like that's where Arroyo was, because you could see the two or three linemen that were with him were in almost a screen type formation, ready to go downfield. So it, again, 9 out of 10 times, I think he would have made that. I just thought that was a little bit weird. It was weird. There were times where Cam seemed locked in with his receivers, and then there were times where it was just like, are we missing something? Is this like rust from the bye week? I'm not sure what's going on, because there were a few throws where I felt like he could have easily made them, and they just either soared or were too far behind the receiver. Another thing I kind of noticed, where you remember we were talking about going into the preview, I was like, I'd like to see a little bit more like screens or passes to the outside. In the first half, you could kind of see why we don't do that, because they were a little ugly and like immediately getting hit, didn't know where to go with the ball, the receivers. But I mean, obviously, I think was it Horton or was it Sam Brown? No, it must have been Jacoby George. Yeah, that last score at the end where he hit him on the screen and then he was able to wiggle into the end zone. Not sure if we would consider that, part of the play, but I mean, it was nice to see those plays to the outside. Kind of would have liked to have seen it with a running back again in that traditional screen formation where you're pulling two, maybe three linemen, but it's nice to see a little bit of variance in it. I love seeing Arroyo get a lot of action. Arroyo was 6 for 79. I mean, with a 31-yard long. I mean, I thought he had an excellent, excellent game.
And
Um,
he had a drop pass, by the way, that probably would have put him over 100 yards.
oh, easily. That's what I'm saying. That's why I'm saying, like, the game, it was one of those weird things where, again, right off the rip, when you think about it, I was like, this was a terrible game. Like, we came out really rusty, but, you know, you let your nerves calm down. You go, okay, no, there were some really good moments of brilliance. I thought we moved the ball very effectively, both halves. I mean, especially the first drive, which we tend to do, which I've noticed our first drives tend to be very, very good. Like we come out hot. It's that second drive I was looking for, which we were still pretty good. I thought, which is kind of interesting. I'm not sure if this is just because this is my belief. Every team's going to play every team pretty good, unless it's a really bad game, Alabama. Every team's going to play their opponent really well that first quarter. You know what I mean? And I thought Wake Forest played an excellent first quarter. They seemed to just move the ball, especially on that second possession that they had where Mish
Yeah, it was like
Powell
an
got that.
18 play
Yeah, I
drive.
mean
Yeah.
that
It
I got.
wasn't for the pick six.
I mean,
Yeah.
literally, and if you really watch that drive, you go back and you watch that drive. I mean, if Powell was a second or two late or a second or two early, I mean, they wouldn't have gotten a lot of yards on that play, but it could have extended the drive. And then they could have tied it up or gone up. And to me, I was just like, okay, that was one of those momentum shifters. But again, I I like giving credit to our opponents because I think when you crap on your opponent too much, it's going to make your conference look like crap. And I think Wake Forest played probably one of their best games they played all season because they lasted with us, like I said, till 8 minutes left in the fourth quarter where we were able to really kind of put it away and do it. I loved watching our defense. What do you think of our defense?
Before I go on to the defense, the only thing I'll add is you don't need us to crap on our opponents to make the conference look bad because the conference does it for themselves because it's an
That's true.
absolute joke. And that was something I kept repeating that I can't repeat on the show of just how much I effing hate the ACC.
Yep.
And hey, at least other conferences are getting their fair share of bad officiating this week too. But the defense, I was extremely impressed with. I remember watching Mish Powell on that pick six. I'm seeing him line up. I was
Yep.
like, oh, Mish is going to blitz off the edge. This should be interesting. And that was something that we did a little bit more of this week. We were actually like sending numbers. We normally don't blitz that heavily. And
Right.
it was really nice to set, watching the defensive line set the edge. They weren't stunting a whole lot. They stunted a few times. They get bit on a few of those running plays where they stunted. But I overall was a much better game. Maui Noah seems like he's a little healthier. Kiko, number one, he made most of his tackles.
Yeah.
Saw a lot of speed. Wes Saint was, had a tackle for loss on the opening defensive play for Miami. The defensive backs played really well. OJ Frederic has been fantastic. They're playing a lot more man coverage. And if you notice too, they have three safeties now playing in the game because they're moving Mish to basically playing a nickel
I
or
saw that.
quarterback.
I
They've got
noticed that.
Zaquan Patterson and Jaden Harris both playing. Jaden Davis playing. No, I'm sorry, Jaden Harris. It is Harris. Uh, both playing their true safeties. So yeah, love
Yeah,
it.
I think again, not that they're listening into our game, but like our show, but I did notice that like even like going back to the offense really quick because how do we miss talking about him? I mean, we can always go back to other things in the offense, but Lyle. I mean, I yeah, let's just give a little golf
Yeah.
clap for him. I mean, that
Yep.
was phenomenal. I mean, seeing him come in, I think what was it? I think it was the third possession we had where he came in and immediately 10 yards right off the rip. Just like he was like, let me get that first down. Boom. And you could see the explosiveness. And I think I forgot what game it was, but we did something like that. Maybe it was Louisville. I'm not sure. But there was a game a few weeks back where we did the same thing where we started off with Martinez and Fletcher, and then we got the other guys in. And again, it's not just fresh legs, but it's also for me, from what I remember when I played football, you're always looking out for numbers, right? You're always looking out for certain players. that sets up the scheme. That sets up like what sort of play they're going to do. So when you get Lyle out there, it's like you don't know. Is he in there for blocking, for pass blocking? Is he in there for a quick stunt to the outside? Is he in there for just distraction, just like as a disguise? We don't know, but obviously we know why they put him in this game. I mean, this guy had, what did he have? I mean, he was 7 for 115 yards with the long of 61. That one at the end where
Yep.
I mean, that was just, I mean, power. I mean, when he laid in it with the shoulder and then picked himself up with the same hand. I mean, I remember watching that and going, this kid's gonna be good.
Yeah.
This kid
Watching that
is,
person watching that personnel, one change of pace for sure. But I remember watching him go in. I was looking around to see, like, okay, well, where's the second running back? I'm surprised that they have Jordan Lyle in there by himself. And I'm thinking to myself, well, he's not going to pass block. He's probably just going to get the handoff. He
yeah,
breaks a couple of big runs, but they keep him in. And they showed a full range of play calling with him in the game, both pass protecting and also being the main option out of the backfield. So it was great to see that versatility. It probably shows a little bit about his maturity over the course of the season. They're trusting him more as that change of pace back to come in and do that. And, when you have a 1-2 punch like Martinez and Fletcher, a guy like Jordan Lyle is definitely a difference that, teams have to prepare for now in terms of you're not really seeing plays develop longer. He's hitting the hole really fast.
yeah,
So
which I like.
yeah,
I love that. I guess I always thought because of who Damian Martinez was, he would be our power, and then our speed guy would be Fletcher. But I guess Fletcher is also another power runner as well.
mhm.
So that's why we don't see that speed burst with Fletcher as well coming out of the hole, kind of like you see Jordan Lyle coming out of the hole. But I will say this: while their numbers weren't like Heisman or MVP worthy, I think the tandem of Damian Martinez, especially in certain formations where you had both running backs in the backfield, and I mean, that's hard. I mean, how, because again, do you guard the run at that point? Or do you leave space for a slot receiver like Restrepo on the outside?
Yep.
I mean, there's so many things when you have that double running back setup in the offense that I was watching it and I was like, there was one play where Fletcher got like a good, like I want to say like 15-yard where he squeezed in that A gap. It was super skinny, but it looked so good because again, it could have gone to either running back, and I think either running back would have pounded through that hole and got. I mean, this is gonna get cut, and probably if anyone's watching this, I just realized I'm setting myself up here.
No,
But
we love like look, we love the running game because it pounds all the holes, and we
a
love that our
pound,
team
listen,
opens
we
up
that's
those
all we
holes.
do. We just fill holes. That's what we do.
Exactly. So we come to
But
Miami.
exactly. But what I thought was awesome about our running game is again, you look and Jordan Lyle is making up over half the yards, right, for all of them. But it's like do you use a rapier? Do you use a katana? Do you use a broadsword? Do you use a battle axe? Like every weapon has its use and purpose. And I thought the way we used Damian Martinez, Mark Fletcher, and then Jordan Lyle was perfect. And honestly, I think we kind of caught Wake Forest off guard with Jordan Lyle.
Yep. The other thing I'll say too is the only criticism of the offense that I have is I don't know if these formation penalties were actually warranted, but every time Miami tried to run really, really fast, they got called for false starts, which was frustrating as hell. And to be honest with you, I thought we would see a little bit more of Isaiah Horton in terms of targets because we're watching that first half and he seemed really frustrated coming back to the huddle and coming back to the sideline where he's
Yeah.
like, "Hey, I'm open. Like you don't have to throw a bomb to me every time, but if you want to look at your matchups and you're seeing Restrepo double teamed and Jacoby George double teamed, traditionally over the course of the season, you've seen kind of Jacoby George come alive in the second half because
Yeah.
there's missed targets or there's just there's focus on other receivers in Miami's formation that they start realizing, okay, Jacoby's the open guy.
Yeah.
Isaiah Horton was the open guy on Saturday, and this really didn't target him enough. I think he had a couple catches for
Yeah. He only
like
had
that
3 for 18.
first down.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Isaiah Horton only had, yeah.
and if you look at his targets, I mean, he could have had a much bigger day if they just threw it his direction.
Yeah, I
But
mean,
I'm not
Jacoby
going to
George had a
criticize.
great day. I mean,
Yep.
again, there's a lot of things that obviously we can improve on, which we can get to in a few minutes after we get to the defense. But I thought all in all, our wide receivers they played exactly how they needed to play. There again, what I thought was a highlight of this game was we used the right players for the right plays. There were certain things that got us to extend drives, that got us into better field position. Because let me tell you something, Wake Forest punter is their MVP. I mean, there were 2 or 3 drives where we were pinned within our 5, and I was like, this is scary. This is scary stuff. These guys are really good. But going over to our defense really quick. I thought our defense was played pretty lights out. I mean, when you look at which again, it was nice to see certain things that were changed, like locking up the ends. Like you could see that the ends were locked up. There were a few times though where there was a little bit of gap integrity that was questionable. Where their Claiborne, I think is Claiborne,
Yep.
the running back for Wake Forest, where he was able to just squeeze through and gain these yards and gut us. And I was just like, ooh, but I did like I will take those like 5 or 6 plays that occurred for the entire day of just locking down the ends. Cause that's, I mean, credit to the guys on that side of the ball because you could see the penetration there. I mean, our line was back there, and especially you could see that Lance Guidry was smelling blood. There was that one drive in the third quarter where it was like we not only got them on like false start penalties, but it was just like 2 back-to-back sacks with, I
Yep.
think one of them was by Mesidor and then maybe the other one was Besainth.
Knocked him
Um,
out of field goal range.
yeah,
Yeah.
again, to me, it's not just about 3 and outs, which they had. I think there was 3 or 4 3 and outs for Wake Forest, but what was really impressive to me was in a moment where, again, they're driving down in the second quarter and you get that pick six, and then you get that in the third quarter, that stop drive where you push them out of field goal range. That's to me, those are as good as touchdowns. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
if you really think about it, our defense really played a perfect game because they really didn't give any touchdowns up, right?
No.
The 2 touchdowns were the 1 kick return, and then that one, I mean, I didn't
Yeah,
want to
that
get to
busted coverage.
that. I mean, and that again, it was 1 play, but you really, I mean, I watched that play again. You really can see the miscommunication there
Yep.
because you have, I actually wrote the whole thing down. Where was it? Yeah. You could see that like OJ Federic signaled to Alderman. He was like, you go get him because he was like on the front. And then Alderman wanted to hand it off to someone else, but there was no one there. And then that's how they got their touchdown, you know? And so to me, if you look at it with the pick six, defense played perfect. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, if you get rid of, let's say Miami had an absolutely disastrous offensive day and nobody else scored, it'd still be 7-7
Yeah,
because the defense scored as much as Wake Forest offense did.
exactly.
So incredible showing from them. Yeah, special teams was an adventure, kind of a hit or miss because they give up the touchdown, but then they also force the fumble later in the fourth quarter, so they kind of make up for their mistake.
Yeah.
Dylan Joyce didn't have the best of punting days, but he did have one great punt where he went coffin corner and stuck him at like the 2 yard line or something like that. So overall, it was kind of like a 50-50 day for special teams, which
Yeah,
in a
I would
game
say
like
that,
this,
yeah.
you'll take it.
It's like yeah, exactly. It's like equally brilliant, equally stupid. I'm just like, "Ah,
Yep.
why?" Like, that busted coverage on that kick return, I was just like and but props to the team. You know, there was a moment where the momentum drastically, because remember, for those who weren't at the game, in the second quarter, again, Wake Forest is driving down the field. They have the chance to go up 14-10, I think is what the score was. It was 10-7 at the time.
Yep.
We get that pick six. Then they get that kick return. I mean, easily the game could have gone sideways again. And credit to the team. They kept their heads up. They dug in deep and they just continued to push and push and push. And again, third quarter, Wake Forest still like was able to move the ball very successfully. Again, I'm not sure. I think for me rewatching it, it was just poor tackling. The assignments,
Yeah.
they seem to be there. They seem to be in the right position. There wasn't that many like, oh, where were you? Or you missed a coverage, or or there was bad communication. It was more just they were hitting and they were running. That guy, what's his name? Damon Claiborne,
Claiborne. Yeah.
fire. That guy was on fire. I don't. He easily burned like 6,000 calories because the dude.
And I don't think he was 100% because he didn't run
No.
out with the team at the beginning of the game. He came out like, right before kickoff. And then again, he was also the first guy in at halftime and he came out late in the second half as well. Like in terms of after halftime, like he didn't run out with the team. So I'm wondering if he was having some issues on his own end, but he gutted it out for that game for sure. If
Yeah.
anything, we were joking about this during the game, but I wonder if that special teams return was just trying to help the defense get some more rest because they just had this like 6 minute, 18 play drive. They get the pick six, but that means you're going right back out on the field. So it's like, is the defense going to give up a touchdown drive or, hey, at least your offense gets the ball because you gave up a quick 7 off a kick return?
Yeah,
But
to me, I wonder sometimes when you see plays like that, it's like is where do you like, don't you know your role? Like, don't you know your assignment, like your lane? You stay in your lane and then you engage.
Yeah.
I'm wondering because they mentioned before, they were mentioning how I think it was either the special teams coach or no, it was Mario. Mario had mentioned that they're allowing certain players who normally don't get enough reps on whatever side of the ball they normally play on to get on special teams. I'm
Yep.
wondering if this is just jitters from players who are not used to being in the game. They're getting a little overzealous and they're trying to go for tackles and go for angles that probably aren't the best, which is why they're giving up these chunk yardages. Because I think there was, I'm not sure if it was a punt or if it was a kickoff where they were going towards the east end zone and they got a chunk of yards out of that as well.
That was the punt, and that was where they should have called the illegal block in the back,
Right.
right at the point of attack, which I was screaming because I literally the guy got the punt right in front of me, and I'm directly in line, and you see the straight up push. It makes him look like it was like an over pursuit on the Miami players' end. It wasn't. He got straight up blocked in the back.
Yeah.
And they let it go. And yeah, they got the ball at like the 50 or the 4 on like Miami side of the field, like the 45-yard line. And that was thankfully the possession where the defense stepped up and knocked them out of field goal range by, having back-to-back sacks, which was fantastic to see in terms of how they were able to, just by like the few stunting that they did do was bringing extra numbers. There was a lot of like Kiko attracting, the one thing about Claiborne that he had his criticism in is that he's not the best pass blocker. So if they're
Yeah.
not using him directly in that offense, he was missing his blocking assignments. He was going with Kiko, and that's opening guys like Ahmad Moten who are just coming around the other side. So you're coming right down Main Street. It's something that a few of the older like Miami legendary defensive linemen have been talking about of to hell with the stunts, just come right up the middle and just get
Yeah.
pressure. And that's what Miami started doing in this game. And I think you'll see more of that next week against Syracuse.
And to me, when you're playing a system that Wake Forest likes to play, that mesh RPO kind of thing, where they kind of run slow and they like delay. It's like a delayed, almost like what do they call that? Uh, I
Like a
forgot what type
draw.
of, like a draw. Yeah, like where it's like a
Yeah.
draw. You, I just don't think that's a smart play. I mean, again, even if that's your bread and butter, when you're playing a team with athletes like Miami, you could see, and that's where I think Mario outcoached, or you could say Shannon Dawson outcoached, and Lance Guidry outcoached the Wake Forest coach, because when they were quick to the outside and when they would do quick dink and dunks, they were getting yards. And even running right up the middle when they would run fast with Claiborne, not any of these draw or mesh plays, they would get chunks of yards. But the second they would go to their bread and butter, that little mesh thing where they would kind of act like they're going to hand it off and then run, every time we were in the backfield. And then you could see Lance Guidry was smelling blood. And he was like, they're going to do it again. They're going to do it again. And I'm going to blitz them again. And the back-to-back blitzes, which to me, it's, again, not that I don't trust our defense, but it's like because our secondary is so suspect, it's like when you blitz like that, you're obviously leaving man to man. If not, if you're playing zone, you're leaving chunks of space open. It's like what could happen, but it was nice to see that like our line got to the quarterback. We got some sacks. I think there was like 6 tackles for a loss, is what it
Yeah.
was. Yeah,
5
six.
sacks and like 6 tackles for loss. Yeah.
I mean, that basically means we were setting up shop in the backfield.
Yep.
That was a great. So all in all, I thought it was a great performance. I thought it was a great way to come out from a bye week. Wish it would have been a little bit more dominating going
Complete.
into like the third quarter.
Yeah.
Just because getting that late into the game, because it again, we're in these last 2 weeks. Notre Dame knows what's going on. It's put up points, show up, because you need to win by a large margin. And a lot of people, like, they're going to see the final score of 42-14, but people who know and the people who are going to watch are going to say Miami struggled. And you can even see that on the ESPN website. It's like pulls like a last minute win. I put it in ours. It was a decisive win, but I feel like, again, uh, we're kind of like Ole Miss, except we're not fumbling the bag like Ole Miss. It's like on a good day, we can beat anyone. I truly believe that. I believe there's not a team right now, maybe Oregon, maybe Ohio State, that would be able to run with us on a good day. But again, it's so inconsistent at times. And we're such a late starting team. It gets me worried because I have a feeling, I mean, knock on wood, we're going to make the playoffs. But it's when we get into that, it's like I don't know if you're going to have those shots to wait to the third quarter, midway through the third quarter, start pulling away from teams. Nick Saban said, like, it's like, you win the game when you get your opponent to tap out. Now, when that opponent taps out is based on you and how hard you want to go. It could be the first quarter, it could be like us in the last 8 minutes of the game. But that's when you solidify your win. And I would like us to start seeing us pulling away from teams. Again, it doesn't have to be like a 3 touchdown lead or even a 2 touchdown lead, but I would like to see a dominant, like at least one possession, preferably a touchdown lead in the third quarter. Like it's like, okay, we
Yeah.
get the ball back and we're pushing. We get the ball back and we're pushing. Because like again, not to poo-poo on Wake Forest, but Wake Forest is a 4-17.
Yep. And that
We
was a 6-point lead for a lot of the game. I mean, I would
yeah.
that I think what's interesting is that this was the first real dominant defensive showing
Yeah.
from Miami really since week one.
Yeah, since
And
Florida.
because of our collective fear of watching this defense, it never felt comfortable. It was like
Exactly.
every time they got to stop, it was a miracle that just kept happening over and over again. But if you had seen consistent defensive play like that from Miami all year, I think that 6-point cushion would have felt more comfortable.
Yeah, and I think also when you put that in tandem with Cam Ward not clicking with his wide receivers like he normally does, it makes
Yep.
it doubly as bad because again, the third quarter, they're the first 2 drives Wake Forest had, they were 3 and outs, quick 3 and outs, and you feel good about that. But then when we're only putting up a field goal in one, and then we're punting at one point, it's like, oh, you're like, okay, it's like we're letting them hang around a little bit too long. And when you get into the playoffs, and I mean, God willing, we beat Syracuse next week.
Yeah.
SMU is they're not gonna be slow. They're gonna be
Nope.
firing fast. And again, I know we've come back from Cal, we've come back from Virginia Tech, but I just I don't want to get into that kind of a shootout with SMU and whatever teams in the playoff. Anything else, Rudy, before we move on
The
about
only
the
other
Wake Forest
scary
game?
thing was the one Xavier Restrepo fumble that also got, that was a turnover. But hey, defense stepped up again, which was, great to
Yeah,
see.
and I watched that again, and it's funny. The 2 turnovers we had, I literally forgot about them
Yeah.
because they not that they were insignificant, because any turnover is significant. But again, like you said, our defense stepped up both times. But I also think both turnovers were such freak plays that like
Yep.
how many times does that happen to Restrepo?
It doesn't.
You
That's what's
know,
so weird about it.
that's what
Yeah.
I'm saying. So like if it would be like Damian Martinez, like Damian Martinez doesn't fumble the ball. You know what I mean? And that guy's a beast. And it's like, so it's like, again, it's like the one freak game you get a year, like we were talking about in the preview. You're gonna have that. I give that to Restrepo. I mean, the guy, he was being tackled and held up, and then the guy came in at the last minute, knocked it out, and he was spinning too. So he was in
Yep.
motion. It wasn't. It's again. I chalk it up to a freak play. Again, I would like to see that cleaned up, make sure that it doesn't happen again. So because I don't like turnovers, period. But I credit props to our defense, played lights out. I thought they played a great game. It was nice to see the defense come out after, a bye week, clean those things up, minus that one communication error, I'm sure. But after that, there wasn't any really after that. So I'm excited for Syracuse this week.
Extremely excited for Syracuse because there's so much momentum for them to build on. And if you look at the way that Syracuse offense kind of moves, we'll talk more about it later in the week. But I think this is a great matchup for Miami. And I think it's something that they don't have to really prepare for something that's brand new. They should have an idea of like what the game plan is early on and know how to exploit it.
Yeah, and so normally we would wrap up our weekly recap right here, end it because we're done talking about the Canes, but we had chaos, chaos. That's all I kept singing was Duel of the Fates in my head the entire night, but just saying the word chaos over and over because my God, what a weekend did we have in college football. Let's just start chronologically throughout the day. Ole Miss pooping the bed to Florida. My God, Lane Kiffin, what are you doing? I Okay, real question. Who is worse, James Franklin or Lane Kiffin?
I'll say James Franklin only because he's had the guys for longer. This was kind of like Lane's first big shot of saying, "Okay, I'm a contender this year."
Yeah,
So, but what a yeah. You'd think after what happened to them earlier in the year, where they lost to Kentucky, that
right.
they would have learned their lesson, and then they go into Florida and they just lay an absolute egg. I mean, if you look at that last that last possession, Jackson Dart throws picks on 3 consecutive plays.
Three. Like, bro. And then
Gets bailed out on a
watching him
couple of
cry, have a meltdown, get back on the field, throw another interception, cry, get back on the field, throw. I'm like, bro, get it together. I will
yeah.
argue. I asked that question because I genuinely believe Lane Kiffin is worse than James Franklin. At least James Franklin is losing the games he's supposed to lose. I don't understand how Lane Kiffin has the talent he has, wins these miraculous games that he sometimes wins, like finally beating Georgia this year. Like the year he could have easily gone to the playoffs, had an awesome seed too, because he wouldn't have had to go to the SEC Championship, wouldn't have had to have
Yep.
played either Georgia or Texas, you know? Hoops the bed with Kentucky, hoops the bed to who was the other team he lost to? Hold on, let me find this really quick.
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm trying to remember who it was too.
Kentucky.
Oh,
It
oh
was
yeah,
Kentucky.
originally
No,
Kentucky. Yeah,
it was
yeah, Kentucky
Kentucky and
was
and
yeah.
then LSU. That last minute LSU. Who LSU garbage too. Sorry.
Yep.
That what you're why are you in these games that you shouldn't be in? Like we even talked about in our preview. Like statistically, Florida should have had the floor wiped with them. It should have been
Yeah.
what our game was, part two. It should have been another bloodbath in the swamp, part two. And just how that happens, Lane Kiffin loses games he should never lose. And it happens every year. Every year this happens. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
bro, you have talent this year. You went out and you got the portal lottery. Like you hit the lottery with the portal and you still lost.
Yeah.
And then
It's
you have Jackson Dart, who's supposed to be a Heisman hopeful, throwing 3 picks back to back to back. Like what I just wonder, like, especially the last two. Like, I get the first one where you're trying to thread the needle, you're trying to get that touchdown, you're trying to go up. But the last two were just so bad. Double coverage on both. And then the last one was, who was that even to? I don't even know who that last throw was to, because it felt like it felt like it was a punt to Florida. Like you were just
yeah.
like, we're just gonna punt it to them. Who cares?
Yeah, it's like we're done. We don't want this game anymore. No, it was wild to see, and that's something that uh look, I think we could say this now. I think we have enough evidence going through. The SEC is just not that good of a conference this year. There's
No,
really
they're
not
not.
even there's not even like an elite number one team because any day a team can be beaten. And before that used to be kind of a selling point of like, well, there's so much competition here. I'm sorry, but a lot of these are Timmy Jimmy fights, as you would like to put it,
Love it.
every single week with these
Turn.
different teams. Right. That's exactly what these are because we've seen the body of work of some of these teams when they play out of conference. This LSU team that was supposedly becoming a playoff dark horse that then completely craps the bed, or Florida that was supposed to be a team at the beginning of the year that everyone was talking about. They get wiped with Miami and everyone stops talking about them. But hey, they're going on a run now. And congratulations to Billy Napier
They're the
because
hot
they're
team.
probably going to be bowl eligible. They're going to be Florida State this weekend.
Well,
That
no,
should
they
be a
are bowl eligible
cakewalk.
this year, right?
Right.
Beating Ole
Right.
Miss, like
Yep.
again, like I'm just there's so much motivation if you're an Ole Miss player. And again, I get it. Like everyone has a bad day, and that's the beauty of the sport. First, let me preface this because I don't want to sound like I'm just trashing and beating up on the SEC. I get it. This is the game of college football. Like it's a momentum driven game. They're young kids. Some weeks they're going to come out to perform. Some weeks are not. Some weeks they're going to come locked in. Some weeks they're not. You can see that in the proof when Ole Miss played Georgia. They were locked in. They were ready to go. They were prepared. This week you could tell they were not prepared. They didn't. They just went through their motions playing Florida, and Florida popped them in the mouth. And that's the thing about college football, which is what I love. But again, it's also why it's hard for some people, I guess, to watch college football because you'll see teams that should be dominant, should be winning, should have a certain record, and they're losing to teams they shouldn't lose to. And again, I get it. They're kids, and I will give them that. But
But
you
shouldn't
have
it mean more?
it
Doesn't
should.
it just mean more in the SEC? That's their whole anthem, right? So if
Yeah,
you can't get up to play
and
them
this is
every week,
and this is the problem with the narrative of the SEC, right? You go to you talk about okay, like let's talk about LSU, right? Oh, this is a dark horse. They're barely beating a USC team that is under 500. Like, I'm sorry, like that
and
you
SC
cannot.
won
How are
that
you?
game.
Yeah, it's like I'm
Yeah.
sorry, you cannot give them credit for being a dark horse because they hung with USC and then they hang with Ole Miss, and it's like anyone can hang with anyone. We
Yep.
saw that. I mean, using our game for a reference, Wake Forest. But that's where it bothers me because it's like just because you have SEC on your jersey, when you hang with the team, it either makes you look good or you just had an off day. But in the ACC or the Big 12, it's like, oh no, it's a talent discrepancy, and you're playing lower to your talent. Well, why isn't anyone saying Ole Miss played lower to their talent? Instead, the narrative is Florida's on fire. Florida's going to a bowl game. Florida has a chance to go positive. It's like,
Yep. they're saving recruits. They're getting people to
Yeah,
come in. They're going to make a run next year.
they're flipping recruits, and Billy's proving why he deserves the job. When 3 weeks ago, everyone, including boosters, were ready to pay this boy out and bring Lane Kiffin in. And
Yeah.
it's just it's obnoxious. It's, to me, if you can't see the SEC bias in the national media, just don't watch our show. Like, don't watch any college football, because
Nope.
you're being force fed stuff that doesn't exist, and it's not real. Like, I don't understand this narrative that, oh well, SET, there's just like this cluster of teams. I'm like, okay, moving forward now, let's talk about Bama and Oklahoma. I'm so
Awful.
perplexed that a number 7 team is getting blown out 3-24. And I get it. There was that one call that was a random pass interference or illegal use of the
Yeah.
hands. I don't even know what they ended up calling that play where
That was illegal touching is what they called it, because they said that Ryan Williams was lined up like he was covered at the line. If you look at the
yeah.
screen, like you look at the screen grab of how their formation was set up, he's an eligible receiver. He's on the line. It's the most ridiculous call. And look, we as ACC people, we know everything about terrible officiating because we
Yeah.
watched it for about 20 something years. Now that the SEC has it, let's be honest. It was 24-10 was the final score. Let's just give them that touchdown. It's still they lost by 2 scores.
Yeah, and here's the other thing too. It's like the two, was it 2 pick sixes, or was it 1 pick six and then, like, yeah, I think it was 1 pick six, and then like the other pick was like he ran to like the
Yeah, red
5 yard
zone
line.
turnover.
Yeah, it was a
Yep.
red zone. How? How? Like, Oklahoma is bad. Like, they are really bad. Like, Oklahoma is literally 6-5, 2-5 in the SEC.
Yeah, I
Meaning,
understand the whole like Brent Venables defense thing, but let's just look at
no,
how bad Alabama was moving the ball.
that's
They could
another,
not run it.
again, this is another narrative. I just We got to stop giving people clout for where they were.
Yep.
Like, Brett Venables is great, but when you're
At
2 and
Clemson.
5, yeah, when you're 2 and
You
5 in the SEC, like, I'm sorry, you're at best a mid-tier, like, ACC team at
Yep.
best, at
Yep.
best. And I'm just it's nauseating the amount of, like, preference and bias that all these coaches and these teams are getting from the SEC, where it's just like, okay, like, again, let's go back to the record we were talking about a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, where the ACC has a winning record against everyone, against except for the SEC. I think we're 2-5, right? And again, with chances to go up to either tie or go just one game under. Again, if the ACC was that bad compared to the SEC, we would have a losing record against the Big Ten. We have a losing record against the Big 12. Everyone, we would have that, or we would be tied with the Big 12 and have losing records of both the Big Ten and the SEC. And that's just not the case. And I
Yep.
think this is my hope. I hope common sense gets into these CFP committee members and they see that the ACC is deserving of 2 teams, because I think SMU is a good team. And and I'm not just saying this to hedge my bets and say, oh, you're just scared that, SMU is going to blow you guys out. I don't think SMU is going to blow us out. I think, if
No.
anything, us and SMU are going to play a tight game. If anything, we will blow them out because they haven't played a defense like our defense. Like, credit to BYU for beating them, but guess what? BYU just got trounced on by
Yep.
Arizona State.
Twice. Yep.
You know
Back
what
to
I mean?
back
Like,
weeks to get
and let me tell you
stomped.
something. Arizona State, balloons love them. Uh,
I know, right?
Arizona State was picked to finish dead last in the Big 12, dead
Mhm.
last, and they just got trounced on. Luckily, they came back and they kept it tight at the very end. But BYU had no business in that game. And if you look, like, yeah, Arizona State's on fire, and they probably, I mean, I think they play Arizona this week. Is that who they play? I'm not sure. It's rivalry week. I assume it's Arizona.
Yeah, it's Arizona. Yep.
Yeah, because it's rivalry week. They're probably going to beat Arizona. And they're gonna
Absolutely.
go to the Big 12 championship. And
Look, let
again, go ahead.
and I'll say let's look at strength of records, because like Miami at the end of next week, at the end of this weekend, they're going to play 5 of the 8 teams that they played in conference will have 7 or more wins.
Yeah.
You can't say that about some of these other teams in the SEC right now. Oh, they all play each other. No, their records are not as good as what their name is. They're looking at the name on the helmet and the name on their jersey, and they're trying to make them look like they're a better team than what their record shows, which frankly just isn't true this season. And yeah, you mentioned Arizona State probably going to be playing for the Big 12 championship. Look what happened with Colorado, another team that just was how much hype has some of these teams had that's been unwarranted until you see the product on the field. As much as Miami has had one loss against Georgia Tech, that's a 7-win football team.
Yeah. Oh, I got one for you right here. What do you think? What team do you think in the ACC has the same record as Alabama right now?
Alabama has 3 losses.
Mm-hmm. They're 8-3 overall, and they're 4-3 in conference. Who do you think has a similar? Who do you think has a similar record as that in our conference that you would never guess?
Louisville? Louisville.
No, I mean Louisville probably does, but
Yeah,
Duke,
that's right.
Duke,
That's right.
Duke.
Duke.
No one's
And
giving Duke any credit. And again, I'm not saying this because Manny Diaz is our old former coach. No. But what I'm saying is like Duke has the same record as Alabama, and no
yeah,
one's giving Duke any credit.
and look at Duke's losses.
Yeah.
Look at who Duke has lost to. The comparison there, it's insane in the sense of they lost to Miami, who has 1 loss.
Yep.
They lost to who are the other 2 losses? They're actually like they're decent
SMU.
teams.
Remember SMU in double overtime.
SMU, who has 1 loss,
Yep.
and their other one is Clemson or Louisville or something like that. Like they have their 3 losses to teams that have, or Georgia Tech, I think it is, who has like 7 wins.
Yeah.
So
It's like you lose to your 2 conference champions or 2 conference
mhm,
like title contenders, and then a
right.
random good Georgia Tech team. Which, by the way, Georgia Tech, not a bad team.
No. No,
Not
I
a
mean,
bad.
look,
Again,
it makes me
this.
sick that we lost to them,
Yeah.
but
And this is my point. I think we talked about this the second week of the year when we were talking about conference realignment and we were talking about scheduling, which we will get into in the offseason. But this is why, to me, you have to get rid of the cupcake teams, and at a minimum, the Power Four teams. And I hate this. Have you noticed this? This is how you also know there is a bias in narrative. Have you noticed this phrasing lately in the last like 6 weeks of the Power Two? Have you noticed that on
well,
ESPN and CBS?
well,
ESPN and
again, who
CBS
have
are
the media
both.
deals?
Yep, they're both now. There's no such thing as a Power Four. They never refer to it as a Power Four anymore. It's a Power Two, and
Yeah,
and
well,
and
sorry.
that to me, again, nauseating as hell. But again, this is why you need to have only the Power Four teams play only each other. And what you do is you do 2 in the beginning, and then you do two like at the third quarter of the year. So like you play the first 2 games will be like intra conference games. You go through maybe like 3 or 4 conference games, then you play 2 interconference games, right? That way we can get a gauge of where are these conferences really, what are people's real records, because you start doing this cluster thing with the SEC and you can't even pinpoint it. Like if I was to tell you going into this Saturday, Georgia's going to make it into the SEC championship, you'd be like, well, how? Like, how are they going to do that? And you're like, oh yeah, Alabama's going to lose to Oklahoma. Oh, and then Texas A&M, they're going to lose to one of the worst teams in the
To
SEC.
Auburn, who Cal ended up beating, who's the bottom feeder of the ACC, in Auburn, a place that Texas A&M couldn't win in overtime, going down 21-0. But here's the best part: because it's rivalry week this weekend, yeah, maybe Georgia plays for the SEC, but do they lose to Georgia Tech also?
No, I mean, I'm an ACC homer, but there's no
I,
way
I don't think
Georgia's
there's a
losing
chance
to
either.
Georgia Tech.
I don't think there's a chance either. But look, the way that the SEC has played this year, I wouldn't say it's a lock. I would say it's highly unlikely, but I don't think it's guaranteed because if just watch any team play this year, they're just outside of Oregon is the only perfect undefeated team. Ohio State looked damn good against
Which, by the
Indiana.
way, I won't just poo-poo. Let's let everyone can catch strays right now, okay? Oregon nearly lost to, was it Idaho or Wyoming? One of the two
Idaho and Boise State in
state.
back-to-back weeks. They
Yeah,
struggle with the state of Idaho. Yep.
yeah, they can barely beat the Idaho because Idaho. And like again, it's not like any. I mean, yes, I will say this: Ohio State and Oregon look like the most complete and consistent teams. With that said, though, it is not like they've played perfectly.
And they
Okay,
haven't played a murderer's row of opponents either outside of each other. The Big Ten is not what it's
exactly.
supposed to be.
And again, like going down the list, like Texas, what makes Texas so good? Because if we're going to sit there and we're going to talk about why Miami is where they're at, right? We have to also talk about Texas because it's not like Texas has beaten anyone either. Because everyone poo poos on Miami, like, oh, Miami at 7 or like in the coaches poll or
Yeah.
Miami at 8 in the AP
Yeah.
poll. It's like, who is Texas beaten?
Well,
Texas is
Texas looked
two
good
two
against
wins.
Michigan,
Vanderbilt,
but
no,
Michigan is a
Vanderbilt, yeah,
five-loss team.
dude. But when
Yeah.
you look at when they do the CFP and they say like they're credible wins, when ESPN does a thing and they're like, oh, they're notable wins, it's Colorado State because they beat them 52-0, which you should do. They're basically an FCS team, and
Yep.
Vanderbilt. And by the
Yep.
way, Vanderbilt, they barely won
Yep.
27-24. And if you watch that game and go back to the game, had they not gotten that last minute interception, I mean, Diego Pavia was basically driving down the field. And I thought was almost convinced that he
Yeah.
was going to win that game for them. I was like, wow, he's going to beat Alabama and Texas. This kid is wild,
Yep.
And Texas still ranked at, I don't even know what number they're at, 3, 4, 3.
Yeah, they're
Okay.
high.
Penn State, terrible. Like, don't get it. Haven't played anyone. They're literally they're like Indiana's Diet Coke,
Yeah.
Penn State's Pepsi or Coke. Like
Yeah.
they're not much better.
Needed a fake
Notre
punt
no,
to beat Minnesota.
yeah,
Yeah.
and Notre Dame looks good, but they lost to Northern Illinois.
Illinois.
Like
Yeah.
I would much rather take a loss from a Georgia Tech team than from a Northern Illinois. I mean, that's like our Middle Tennessee game the other last year, or
Yep.
2 years ago, whatever it is. The only team
Yep.
that, and again, I know Georgia's got 2 losses, but every team we've mentioned except for Ohio State and Oregon, they're better than. I think they're better than Texas because they beat them. They're better than Penn State. They're better than Notre Dame. Why are they so low? Tennessee, I don't understand why they're ahead of us either at number 7. I understand they're 9. They're like 9. Again, the only 9-2 team that should be ahead of us is Georgia. And I'm not saying this as a homer. I'm giving you facts here. Who have they
Yeah.
played? Who has Tennessee played? They played. They've
They lost
beaten
to
out.
Arkansas.
They lost to Arkansas. But let's
They
not,
looked
because no
awful
one's
against
looking
Arkansas.
at the losses though, Rudy. No one
I
cares
know.
about losses this year, which is
Yeah.
except
Yeah.
for if you're in the ACC
They're
or Big 12. If you're in the ACC and the Big 12, your losses count. But if you're in the
right. Their
Big
win
10,
against Alabama looked good until Alabama laid an absolute egg against Oklahoma. Is really what
absolutely.
it is.
And you look, they barely beat Kentucky 28-18. You know what I
Yep.
mean? And let's go to their first game. 69 points, 51 points, 71 points. Bam, this is where it drops. 25 points, 19 points, 23 points, 24 points, 28 points. Like, they're not the high flying offense that they were the first 3, 4 games of the year, which
Nope.
is fine because you can say the same thing about us. But if you're going to say something about Miami, you need to apply that same rule across the spectrum, across every other team in the league. You know what I mean? Like, to
Miami
me,
still
it's
scored 30 in every win, and they only
no.
put up 24 in the loss. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think honestly, after this past weekend, I think we're bumped back up with margin of victory
Yep.
from Indiana. Indiana had the largest margin of victory, but that trouncing they took
Yep.
on Saturday to Ohio State, I think that put us back up to being the number 1 offense overall again. And
Yep.
so to me, it's like, again, and this is what's going to really piss me off too, come tomorrow night. Indiana's not going to fall that far. And they're going to stay ahead
Nope.
of us, which is absolutely ridiculous. Because let me tell you something. If we were undefeated and we went in to play SMU, who is the ACC champion, and SMU blew the doors off of us, like Ohio State blew the doors off
Oh, they're not
Indiana,
getting in the playoff if that
we would
happens. Yeah.
never, ever,
Nope.
ever get into the playoffs. Ever. It would never happen. And again, this is I want people to pay attention to these narratives, because if you don't think there's a bias, you're blind and you're not watching football. You're just you're I don't even know what you're doing at this point. Because again, like I just don't understand when, like, again, that's why we're going to talk about it on Friday about strength of schedule and really getting into the nitty-gritty of these things. We kind of got into it here, but again, how do you lose if you're Texas A&M to
Yeah.
Auburn?
It looked really bad in the loss. Looked really
Really,
bad.
really bad. I mean, I watched that game and I was like, I cannot believe that Auburn is going to come back. And this is the worst part. Kind of like how, like, when we watch our games, we're like, oh, I don't know, like I don't know how I feel about this margin of victory. Are we going to come back? I was convinced Auburn was going to come back. There wasn't a point where I was like, oh, Texas A&M's got this. I was
Nope.
like, no, if you leave time on that clock, Auburn's going to come back, and they did.
Yep. And there's still a chance that Texas A&M beats Texas at home this weekend. How
Oh,
wild is that? How
but
wild is that? That's that's the thing that's so odd about watching these teams play, because it's not that
no, it's
anybody can beat anybody because they
no,
get
no,
up. They're just average.
Rudy, that's yeah, that's low hanging fruit, my man.
Yeah.
That's not the wild part. The wild part is the fact that they're going to keep Texas in the top 5,
Yep.
top 8 worst if they lose
Yep.
to A&M.
Yep.
Like, it's just like, it's so frustrating. Like, it is utterly frustrating
How does
that an 8-3 team is going to beat an 11 and or a 10-1 team, and they're still going to stay in the top 8.
And how does that look when you get to the SEC championship game and it's Texas against Georgia? And let's say Texas loses that or Georgia loses that. You have
Well,
a
no,
two loss, three loss SEC
but
champion.
here's the best part. I'm yes, here it is. Here's the
Yeah.
best part. If A&M wins, Texas doesn't go to the championship. And so they're naturally going to get in the playoffs because they don't have to play for the championship.
Yep.
That's the worst part. The
Yep.
worst that to me, it's like a team that lost to Auburn, who lost to a Cal team, who is the worst team in the ACC besides that's not named Florida State. But we don't
Yeah.
count Florida State. Like Florida State just at this point is, according to ESPN, just been erased from the grid. They're off
Yeah.
the sacred timeline.
They're not even playing on broadcast television anymore. They're playing
No,
on
not
ESPN
they're
Plus.
playing on the
Yeah.
CW. And if they're playing on the CW, no one's watching. Um, but you have a team that could possibly be playing for the SEC championship, who again, because of the preference, I don't even know how that's the frustrating part is
Yeah.
when you get to the SEC championship and if it is A&M versus Georgia and Georgia blows the doors off or beats A&M in general, what do you do with A&M? And then do they keep A&M in because they're the
Right.
SEC runner up? Like it's
Right. And
it's
then
it's it's
right,
nauseating.
you
It's
get
you're
2
just
teams, like, you get 2 teams that didn't play for the SEC championship that get in and get bids, like Tennessee, who's on the, inside now, and then potentially a team like Texas where they don't make the championship game, but they get in with 2 losses anyway. No, it's absolute insanity, especially for how this year has gone, and look, the Big Ten, you could say the exact same thing because at this point, it's still highly likely that they get 4 teams in.
yeah. And but this is the one thing I will say, and I know it's only because we're good this year, and I'm confident we'll make the playoff. Let them in. Let the dregs in. Because if
Yeah.
anything, what it will do is it will prove that they don't belong. And then when we
Yep.
go into next year, and then we go into a 14 or 16 team, whatever it is in 2 years, this should never happen again. This should
Yeah.
never happen again where we have 3, potentially 4 loss teams going in and are potential playoff contenders. Like, and again, there should just be a stipulation. You have 3 losses in conference. Sorry, you're eliminated from the playoffs. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Any team, ACC, Big 12, Big 10, SEC, whatever conference you're in, you have 3 conference losses. I'm sorry, you don't deserve to get in. You just
I
don't.
agree.
I don't think 3 losses in general, okay, because you play interconference, especially if we get into like that stipulation that I would like to see where you play like 4 games that are in the Power 4. Okay,
Yep.
cool. If you have 3 losses, I'm down with that. But 3 conference losses, inexcusable.
I agree.
Inexcusable.
100%
Should not be
agree.
allowed.
Put in a group of 5, put an independent that's got a good record. Hey, they play the schedule that they have because they can't get schools to schedule them and play. Fine. Let's see how they do in the playoff. Perfectly fine with
You look at the little brother, what they're calling now little brother conferences, right? You look at the ACC and the Big 12, right? I'm not gonna lie to you. I genuinely believe this. I think Arizona State, or maybe not BYU right now, but BYU when they were hot.
it. Yeah.
Maybe no, I don't think Colorado. But like you
No.
talk about these runner-up teams in these conferences, I think they could make a run in the playoffs. Maybe not deep, maybe they get to the semis at best. They're not going to win a championship, obviously not. But
Yeah.
still think they make a run. But when you're completely negating them because of what conference they're in, it's inexcusable. And to me, it negates the purpose of a 12-team playoff. Like we
Yep.
got to this point so that there would be more diversity. There would be just a little bit more competition. All it is just an SEC and Big 10 plus one. That's what it
Yeah.
is. That's all it's literally becoming. And the fact that, and again, if you've watched our show, I've been cheering for Indiana this whole season. They don't deserve to be in the playoff. They haven't played anyone, and they got the doors blown off of them by an Ohio State team. They had no major injuries. They had their quarterback. They had all their key stars and their players. There's no reason they should be in the playoffs. I'm sorry. They've proven it. They cannot hang. Now, if it was a one possession game, maybe a 10-point game, I would excuse it. I'm sorry. When you lose by 3 possessions or more, you don't can't hang.
I
Can't
agree. And
hang.
especially because the only chance they have at redemption is what, playing Purdue this weekend. So
There
it's not
no,
like,
and
okay,
that's the
good. They beat
other
them by
thing.
20 points.
There is no redemption. Because
Mm,
again,
no.
let's just say they lost to Ohio State, but then they were going to play Ohio State again, or they were going to play Oregon in the championship game. I would say, cool, now you've got a second chance. Because Joel Klatt made this argument where he was like, well, Indiana, it was their first time in this position playing a top 5 team. And if you look at every top 5 team, when they play in their first top 5 opponent, they're going to lose. And then when they play their second one, they have a much better showing. And I'm like, okay, cool. Let's use that logic. But they're not going to have that opportunity. Because you don't have that opportunity, you don't deserve to play. I'm sorry.
Yep.
Like, it's just like, let's if you can't get to your championship game and you've played no one and you lost to someone who's playing your championship game through just the transaction, like the transitive property, you won't hang. Because let's just say, right? It's because we know it's going to be Oregon and Ohio State. Those two play. And let's just say Ohio State loses again to Oregon. Let's just say by 1 point. Do you
Mhm.
think, by the way, because we're going to keep Penn State in there too, because they're going to stay in there. Penn State only lost by 1 touchdown. Okay, so they lost to the team that lost to the conference champion by 1 point. Okay, that you can get that in. How do you argue an Indiana team that got bludgeoned, not even be
Yeah.
bludgeoned by Ohio State, deserves to be in? When Ohio State
You
can't even win their championship.
Yeah, you can't. And also, it's not you can't say that Indiana ran into a buzzsaw or anything like that. They got the lead. They started that game on the road in the horseshoe with the lead. They made that game close for a little bit and they just got boat raced afterwards. So yeah, with the schedule that you played, you had to make it close to even be considered. They didn't do that. It was something we talked about last week. We talked about how if Indiana can keep it close, they'll, with the one loss, I guess they'll get in the playoff. They didn't do that.
Yeah.
They did the polar opposite of that.
And then Penn State almost lost to Minnesota too.
Oh, they needed a fake punt to win that game. That's how bad. And we knew this because Penn State's been getting by the skin of their teeth the entire season. So,
I
yeah,
again, I just you have an SMU team that is blowing doors off their ACC rivals, but again, apparently the ACC is just junior high. We're just a bunch of JUCO schools that exist on the Atlantic coast.
and
And, oh,
remember,
and with two on the with two auxiliary teams on the West
yeah,
Coast.
and remember that loss to BYU early in the season was before Greg Jennings was named their starter. So they put in a different quarterback. It's a totally different team from that BYU,
But
early season game.
yeah, but here's the thing, Rudy. Any argument you give, there's always going to be some stupid argument because then they're going to say, "Well, then they lost to a BYU team that just lost to Arizona State." And again, it's stupid
Yeah.
because you're arguing with people who don't make sense. Because
Yep.
like again, if you're pushing for the SEC to be this dominant league, you're blind. You're living in the heyday. It's like fans who are still only quoting the 2001 team. Don't get me wrong, the 2001 team is still the best team and will always be the best team. But like I
Yep.
look at my team this year, I look at my team the last 2 decades. I know what we are. You know what I mean? We've up until this point. Here's it on record for the third consecutive time. We've been a mid-tier program for the last 2 decades. Now we're good this year. I'll say it.
Yep.
I know how to call a spade, but let's not call the SEC the most dominant conference in college football because it's not.
Not
It's
that. Nope.
not. It's not the
Not
most
this
dominant.
year.
And
Not
at
this year.
best,
And
they're a
really,
great conference. They're a good conference. They've been consistently good over the past couple of years. But now with NIL, now with the transfer portal, you don't have good old Nick Saban with his death grip over recruits anymore.
nope.
It's fair game. Anyone can play, everyone can play, and you're going to see that. In the SEC, mark my words. Mark my words. In the next 2 to 3 years, you're going to see the SEC level off with the ACC, the Big 12, and the Big 10. I don't even think the
Yep.
Big 10 is going to get that big anymore. It's going to
Nope.
go in the stratosphere like they thought when they were going to get Oregon and Washington.
Look at
I
look at
just
the
don't think it's happening.
records.
Yeah,
Look at the
I know.
records of all the teams in the Big Ten right now. How many 5, 6 lost teams there are? Michigan, USC, you name it. It's really bad. So what you're
And here's
seeing
the
is it's great that there's parity, but there are no elite conferences anymore.
but
Simple as that.
here's the most important point, and I'll close on this. This is where and this is where and you're like, Chris, how do you know that? You're just going by records? No, no, no. I'm going also by recruiting. If you look at the flips, the teams in the South, in the ACC, SMU, any team that is in the South are flipping targets from the West and from the North to come
Mhm.
play and stay at home. That means people don't want to go to those schools. They don't want to go to, no one wants to go to not no one, but like people don't want to go far anymore. They'll
Yep,
go to
and
an
that's
Oregon because that's a Nike school.
and there's
And you got
one
Bob Knight.
anomaly. There's one anomaly. It's the quarterback that just flipped from LSU to Michigan, but you know what? LSU's a sinking ship. So,
Well, not only
with the
that,
exception.
but
Yeah.
again, why did he go there? Because he got $10 million.
Yep.
Like
Exactly.
at this point, anyone can give $10 million. Anyone, literally, as long as you're in a Power Four conference. To me, SMU raised $100 million in like 3 months, SMU.
SMU isn't getting any
SMU.
money from the ACC
See,
because they have enough money at home to pay their own way.
when
Yep.
when SMU can raise basically $100 million in a few months, I'm sorry. If you want to win, you're going to spend money. And you
Yep.
got to spend money to make money, and you got to spend money to win. It's as simple as that. Rudy, anything before we sign off? Anything we missed that you wanted to talk about? Any other games?
Not really in terms of any other games. I'm just going to go back and say it again. There are no elite conferences anymore. I think anybody can beat anybody, and that's why a 12-team playoff is wonderful, and that's why there should be equal representation across all of college football to really show a true national champion. That's all I can
I
say.
can't think of a better point to end on, Rudy. I completely agree with you. Thank you. I know this was a longer recap than expected, but we had to talk about the chaos from the weekend on top of Arcanes. Like, comment, subscribe. Do you agree with us? Were we off on the Wake Forest game? Did you see something that we missed? Were we off on the chaos from this past weekend? Are we off on our view of how conference standings are? Let us know in the comments. Like, comment, subscribe. We'll see you guys on Friday. And as always, go Canes.
Call us homers. Fight
Ha
me.
ha!